All right, hello everybody. I want to welcome back. He's been generous with his time once again. Gary Byrne, the author of Secrets of the Secret Service, and before that, Crisis of Character, referring to his time as a Clinton administration Secret Service officer. And I think there's been a few developments since January when we last talked to Gary, especially concerning not just the Secret Service, but concerning the federal government and intelligence agencies. We're going to ask him a couple questions about those. Of course, some questions about perhaps some firearm issues. There's also, of course, police-citizen encounters. Why not? It's not often we get a law enforcement officer here. And also about our favorite president, number 42, Bill Clinton, I guess. Favorite in some ways, right?
Sure.
So, one second. My tablet restarted, so I have to see if it will. Otherwise, I have to read off my phone. Second. I'll just read off my phone.
Okay.
So in Secrets of the Secret Service, you outlined some of the crucial reforms you said needed to be implemented in order to stabilize an agency that you claimed was on the verge of collapse. Since then, you have said that one of the key steps is in the process now, the merger of the Uniform Division with the Agents Division. Please explain why that was so important, and also what you think would have to be the next change made in the agency.
Sure. So the Uniform Division was pretty much swallowed up by the Agent Division, many years ago. I think they actually took control of them. The Agent Division took control of the Uniform Division probably back in around somewhere between 32 and 38. I forget exactly. But over the years, they took more and more control. In the mid-90s when I was there, they took a lot of control, but they weren't doing it to make the agency better. They were doing it to kind of hold us down and reprimand the Uniform Division. And then it caused a lot of problems and a lot of grief. It caused a lot of people to leave the job. This new director, who is not a former Secret Service agent, he's a former Marine Corps 2-star general. He worked in TSA as an executive for a while, and then President Trump appointed him as director of the Secret Service. Now, up until this point, I hadn't seen him do much, other than he was asking a lot of questions to the employees, especially the Uniform Division. And just recently, he's put out a paper stating that what they were going to do his first step is he is taking the chief of the Uniform Division and the deputy chief of the Uniform Division, and he's raising them up, their pay grade up, off of the Uniform Division scale to the SES scale. Now, that doesn't really do anything for the rank and file exactly, but what it does do is it basically gives the chief and the assistant chief their authority back. I mean, up until this, basically, the best way to describe the chief of the Uniform Division was like the Queen of England. She can't even order airline tickets. You know what I mean? You ever hear that joke? The Queen of England? Yeah. So that's pretty much what they did to the chief of the Uniform Division. They basically had him reporting to like a GS-15, and that's not the way it was set up. And it's not very dignified, and it was terrible for morale. So this step that this new director has taken is a positive step. I hope it's one of many. And the other part of the question, you said, what do I think the next thing is? Well, here's what I think the next thing should be. I think when it goes to Congress to raise the chief's pay and the assistant chief, raise them up to the SES level, I think he should also ask Congress for bonus money for the Uniform Division. And anybody that's been on the job for 3 years or more should get this bonus. I seriously think they should, and I'll explain why. I think they should give them $10,000 at least minimum, cash, no strings attached, just write them a separate check. And here's why. These guys are working night and day in overtime. They are literally running themselves into the ground. And it's at the point now where they're making so much money in overtime that, and that sounds good the way I'm describing it to you, but it's really not, because what they need to do in addition to raising the chief's pay and the assistant chief, is they need to fix the uniform division pay scale. So when they're not working all this overtime, which is the goal eventually, to get so many employees back on the job and working and trained, is that you don't have to work all this overtime. And then when you have a campaign or you have an emergency, your manpower is not already exhausted, physically and mentally exhausted. So they need to fix the uniform and combine it down to 25 years and make it a living wage for the Washington D.C. area.
So, do you believe that structurally the Secret Service? I mean, I have later here it is part of the Department of Homeland Security. So, our federal government's executive branch has dozens of law enforcement arms under 8 different executive level departments, not including the Defense Department. So that's just law enforcement. There are other agencies under control of Congress, the Supreme Court, and even independent agencies such as the Postal Service and Amtrak. You served in the Secret Service when it was a part of the Treasury Department and is now part of DHS. Do you believe that we have too large of a federal law enforcement system in this country? Is the system too complicated for even the informed citizen to understand?
Yeah, no, an informed citizen can understand it, but you have to be told. The best way for you to understand it is to hear from somebody like me. And although when I left the Secret Service, it left the Treasury Department and went to Homeland Security after I left, but I was in Homeland Security as an air marshal. So I really didn't miss a beat as far as what happened to them. It's not really that complicated. Here's the problem, is that they let these agencies get so big. And I'm not sure if you and I have talked about this before, but I've talked about it as much as I can. And I'm not talking about the rank and file, but I want to know where it's written. Let me put it to you this way. It's the best way to describe it to you. Pick your favorite American company. Coca-Cola, Microsoft, whatever. Chevrolet. Let's say Coca-Cola. If you took the way the Secret Service's management structure is, or even the air marshals, and you applied it to those companies, their board of directors would fire everybody, would fire you. They would collapse in a month. You could not support the redundant management and supervision that the government does support. And when I talk about small government, this is what I'm talking about. We need thousands of police officers, but we don't need, a manager for a supervisor for every 10 and a manager for every 25 people. It's ridiculous. You wouldn't run a security company like that, and neither would anybody else.
Yeah, so what you're saying kind of it reminds me a great deal of some of the private sector critiques of government. I think with law enforcement you can't make it exactly like private police. I mean, we did have I believe in your book actually you're talking about when originally there was some sort of private detective agency that the Secret Service developed out of, and that does call into question some issues of especially legal issues of who the Secret Service works for. But I think this president, for example, Donald Trump, is trying to streamline some agencies of the federal government. Do you think that's actually going to happen with him, or is he already too encumbered with the other stuff that's going on with some of these other agencies, the NSA, the FBI, the CIA?
Right. No, I think he can do it, and I think if anybody's ever going to do it, it's President Trump. And here's the thing: you don't have to do a massive firing and all this drama and crap you always, that you get from Congress. All you have to do is stop promoting managers and supervisors, and use attrition, and stop. Like right now, if they say you need a sergeant for every 25 uniform division officers, double it. There's no way, there's no reason that one sergeant can't manage 25 or 50, whatever it is now, double. I know in the air marshals, right before I left, a supervisor was supposed to could only manage supposedly 25 people, 28 people, no more than 28, which was ridiculous. I mean, either the people working for you, in the case of the Secret Service, the Uniform Division, either they're adults that function like a regular adults, or they're not, and they shouldn't be there in the first place. And they need to. The Secret Service needs to look at the way they do some things and stop doing it that way. I mean, literally, the Secret Service. You know, if I found out tomorrow that the Secret Service had a storage, a big storage garage full of buggy whips, I wouldn't surprise me, because I'm sure at one time they bought buggy whips. You know, back when presidents rode in open carriages with horses. Now the Secret Service came on, after that. But my point is that, they still do a lot of antiquated things. They try to give the impression they're high speed, and they are in some ways, but in their management style, it's 75 years old at a minimum. And basically their mentality is, the beatings will continue until morale improves. And one of the things that I've read about, as you know, in my book extensively, in Secrets of the Secret Service, is guys my age, my generation that were there, we took it. We did, because somebody like me, I only had a high school education, and then my education through law enforcement. I wasn't leaving the Secret Service to go anywhere else, except after 9/11, I transferred to the Air Marshals. But if 9/11 hadn't happened, I would have stayed there until I could have retired. I wasn't going anywhere. But people that came on after me, they were younger, they were more educated. They weren't locked in like I felt like I was. And when they get fed up and they don't get what they want, and they keep getting told year after year the same thing, they leave. And it's a huge drain on manpower. We are expensive to train. So.
Yeah, I remember. I don't know if it was either in your book or Bongino's book, which I also have here.
Yeah. Yes.
It was either one of you that said that people from the ATF would go to the training. There's the combined federal law enforcement training in Georgia, and they just poach people, and they'd say, "Hey, you guys want to come over here? We have
that was
better everything, basically."
Yeah, I saw that twice. I saw it when I was in Uniform Division training in '91 down in Glencoe, and then I really saw it when I was in Artesia, New Mexico, training up for the Air Marshals, because I had to go back through training again, because that's what they required. But it was profound. I mean, these guys were smart. We'd be in the gym working out, and you'd see the ATF guy, and he'd see some Secret Service agent with a long face on, and the agents and the officers were training at the same time. In Artesia together at the same time at this particular time in 2003, and they have to see this long face, and he'd say, "Hey, who you here with?" "Oh, the Secret Service." "Oh, where are you going to?" "Well, I don't know yet. They haven't told me. They don't tell us till we get out of out of training. My wife's pregnant." "Oh, congratulations. Where do you live?" "Oh, and this one particular guy, he's in Baltimore." And I knew the guy, actually, and he says, "Oh, I'm from Baltimore area." He goes, "How'd you like to work for the ATF in Baltimore for your whole career?" And the guy's like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I mean, literally in a couple of minutes, the guy's back in there with paperwork, and they poach him. And and the Secret Service, this is what I go back to with their management style. They don't learn from their mistakes. I mean, that wasn't the first time that happened. That had been happening for 25 years. And so instead of fixing the problem and treating their people better, what do? Their director goes to the agency, these other directors or the people above them, and says, "Hey, you guys are poaching our people." They don't tell them the details that, we're treating them so crappy that they're looking for other jobs. So anyway, that's the way it went.
Yeah, I think it's kind of ironic and tragic, since, nobody I know likes the ATF, but some people like the Secret Service. So, people would think, yeah, I mean, people would think the ATF would be a horrible place to work, but I mean, I think in one place you actually said that the satisfaction ratings for employees in the surveys at the Secret Service were the worst for a long period of time, and still are.
2016, out of 305 government agencies, they were 305. And there's actually a funny story, if you want to hear it, that goes with that. So when I was doing the research and I got contacted, I was talking to somebody who was still in the job, and I was very apprehensive about using stuff he gave me But I would use them to bounce off. This is what I heard. Can you just confirm it? But anyway, he gives me the name of this. Right? He takes my takes my information and gives it to a guy that retired about a year before. And this guy contacts me, and he's a very nice guy. And he basically, for about 2 hours one day, he spills his guts of what's going on. So I brought up the survey that you just mentioned, and he started laughing. And here's the story. So the survey comes out, and they're 305 out of 305. So this one officer who is still working at the White House, as a joke, he stops by a bakery and he picks up a big sheet cake. And on the sheet cake, he puts balloons and horns, and written on the sheet cake is, "Congratulations, we're 3 out of 5 out of 3 out of 5." And he brings it in as a joke to break the tension and, to give guys cake. Well, some agent comes in and gets all pissed off, and they reprimand the guy, and they end up giving him a day off. That's why when I use the terminology, the beatings will continue to morale improves, that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. And they actually gave the guy a day off for making a joke.
So, something current events, not to get too deep into the actual specifics, because one of the people in the chat will probably call me a Nazi. But today, President Trump's family, I am ex-IDF, by the way, but today, President Trump's family members were involved in a very long ceremony at the new American embassy in Jerusalem. Did you have any experience protecting a target in a location where nuclear war could break out? Do you think this was a contingency during the event, whether or not the first part is a yes or no?
Yeah, so a lot of places where I worked through my career, of course, I was in the Air Force, and my main job was protecting one of my main jobs was protecting nuclear weapons, our arsenal. As far as the Secret Service, not so much. Like, I actually never traveled to a foreign country when I was in the Secret Service. I traveled only domestically. I did all my overseas travel in either the Air Force and especially the Air Marshals. But these contingency plans you're talking about are always there. I mean, just because we're in the United States, it didn't negate the fact that somebody could attack, whether it was driving, walking up with a small nuclear device, or flying one in on a missile or some kind of makeshift thing. As far as them in Israel, I can tell you what they're concerned about. Absolutely. And I know a lot of this, not just from being in the Secret Service, but also I visited Israel at least 15 times as an air marshal in about a 4 or 5 year period. So what they're worried about is Hezbollah running over the border while they're there. That's what they're worried about. And they're worried about Hezbollah or somebody like that, a terrorist organization, kidnapping one of their protectees. That's their main thing. I mean, they're prepared for everything that you can imagine. But the main thing that they're worried about is a small strike, even a parachute drop to try to take their, into the event. But their biggest protection there is the Israeli, the IDF. The Israeli Defense Forces have been doing this for a very long time. And you mentioned you had been there before, that you worked for them.
Yeah, I was actually a military police officer, and I didn't enjoy it. But there's certainly, I mean, there's certainly, the threats over there. I guess people have to realize that it's a strategic game 24/7. I mean, whichever side you take.
You're absolutely right. And the point I was making is that it's such a small area. I mean, by the time you realize they're coming at you, they're there. The Israeli defenses, the protection they're providing for their citizens, they're providing for our protectees while we're there. And then the Secret Service and the military, our military and the Israeli military, do certain things on top of that. They might be flying more CAPs, combat air patrols, that type of thing. They might have a triple redundancy missile system set up. They may have, there's many things they could do. But to get to your question, your guest's question, to the basics of it, is that just about any scenario, no matter how crazy it is, they've probably looked at it. I mean, 10, 20 years ago, it might have sounded crazy, but to say today that they're looking for tunnels that were dug is realistic. You know, somebody who dug a tunnel and might pop up where they are, that type of thing. They look at everything. They take as few chances as possible. They try to do it efficiently, and they get the help of everybody involved. So it's an excellent question.
So, here we go. As an officer of the Uniform Division, you had many functions that were similar to police officers at other levels of government. When you observe current issues of police citizen shootings, whether of black people or otherwise, where do you think the main responsibilities lay on the officers, the suspects, or not, or neither? Is it specific case? Do you see officers that you think should be convicted sometimes? I mean, you're not a judge, obviously, but you have
Right.
some
Sure.
experience.
Sure. We had some issues when I was there. Here's the best way for me to describe it. If you come, good behavior is good behavior, bad behavior is bad behavior. If you come with, when I worked at the White House and I was on patrol, if you came to my attention, you did something. You were acting in a certain way. If you come, and all these, you can take most of these police shootings that have happened over the last 5 or 7 years that have helped build up this anxiety and hostility towards the police, and you can frame them up this way. You have to look at the suspect's behavior, and we live under a blanket of laws, and we accept only certain types of behavior. The problem is that society wants that to change where the laws are not. In one case, one of these suspects is walking down the middle of the street, acting like he's intoxicated, walking down the yellow line and throwing his hands up in the air. You cannot expect a police officer to ignore that because he's endangering himself. He's actually endangering other people because he could cause an accident himself or end up being an accident. So they go and they intervene, and then there's words passed, and then this guy doesn't want to follow directions. And next thing you know, the police have to put their hands on him. This is the way it goes. And it's, I know I'm simplifying it, but it is this simple. And you're talking to somebody who has gotten the living shit kicked out of him as a police officer in the Air Force. My first arrest was a disaster. And the only thing that saved me was that somebody came to my aid. I was by myself. And I'll tell that story later if you like. But the police, 99 are there bad police officers? Yes. And, if you're asking me if I've seen one, I think I've seen one when I was in the Air Force. And I'm not even sure that he was really bad. He was just a little bit protective of everybody. Cops want to do the right thing. Citizens that are under the influence or are behaving badly, they don't. Some of these things start out as citizens just acting bad to draw the police attention, and then once they do, it escalates. And you make one mistake. The police are not perfect; they make mistakes. I've made mistakes, but most police officers every day that they remind themselves of that oath they took, and they are trying to do the right thing. But bad things happen, and you also have to realize too. You take any one of these incidences. The one that pops to my mind is Trayvon Martin, and again, he was acting in a weird way. He drew somebody's attention. Yes, I know the guy was a citizen. He wasn't a cop. I get that. But the reason I bring up Trayvon because everybody wants to paint him like a little angel. Well, that's not really who he was. He had a very extensive arrest record and had some bizarre behavior, and it got the best of him. I don't wish, when these incidents happen and citizens get killed, it breaks my heart, just like it does when the cops get killed. But the bottom line is bad behavior draws the police attention. And you're setting yourself up, it might go well. Maybe you change your mind. Maybe everything goes well. But if you get stopped by the police for whatever reason, and you've brought it on yourself and something goes wrong, you do take a certain amount of responsibility. The police, are they perfect? No. Do they always try to do the right thing? Absolutely. In my experience.
Yeah, and I have to add, obviously, I was a police officer in the military, but in my civilian life, I probably know at a ratio of 40 to 1 criminals to police officers. So, our Am I sad sometimes? And maybe I'm exaggerating, but I do know a lot more people who have been in legal trouble, criminal legal trouble, than I do. I've probably known about 2 or 3 police officers in real life, and I always, you never feel good for somebody who's been arrested,
No.
and you don't feel good for your unless it's like really some guy who deserved it, but uh,
Or in some cases, an intervention.
right.
Go ahead.
So, I usually do try to, inspect the quality of the work done in the arrest or whatever. But, I think unless you're a legal expert, I just watched, for example, The People versus OJ.
Yeah,
And, there's ways that you can pretty much paint the police to be basically demons.
absolutely.
And then the criminal still committed the crime, though. So it's an issue of the way our legal system works.
Yeah, you're right, because they only have to bring in that doubt. Um, yeah, like I said, there's no perfect answer, but I don't have, and I'm also one of those people. I brought my kids up to, to respect the police and realize that, when you do, if you need help, to go to them. Don't be afraid of them. Of course, for my kids, it's a little different because, I am a cop like you, so, but once in a while, and this used to bother me. I used to see this a lot in Washington. I'd be working at the White House and would see parents come in with their kids, and they would say to the kids, "You be good, or he'll lock you up." Don't make your kids afraid of the police naturally. It may be a joke to you, but you see it all the time where people will say, if you don't start behaving, he's going to arrest you. Well, no, I'm not going to arrest you. Be a parent, get your kid under control, and don't make them afraid of us. So, but anyway.
Right. And I think we're going to get into some of the issues of people who, especially your book, Crisis of Character, for example, and Secrets of the Secret Service. But specifically in June 2016, Edward Isaac Dovere, a reporter for Politico, I've actually exposed kind of a story that he did recently that is kind of crap, which I actually mentioned to you off air, but
Right.
he actually published an article where he claimed that the Association of Former Agents of the U.S. Secret Service had condemned Crisis of Character, claiming that you had underlying motives, as if you can't have.
Right.
Everybody's human, but here are some more quotes from the unnamed people that spoke to Devere. One person said, "There is no place for any self-moralizing narratives, particularly those with an underlying motive." So, in your Crisis of Character, I wouldn't say was super moralizing, and I do kind of have like a literary eye for that.
Sure.
There's a second one. The inner perimeter is 100% controlled by the Presidential Protective Division. That person was making the case that as a UD officer, you could not have had contact with the First Lady or the President. And then finally, from Jan Galuli, who could be Tanya Harding's sister-in-law, but the spelling's a little different. That's a 90s joke for those that don't get it. I never once saw any kind of what I would have considered inappropriate behavior, referring to the people in the White House.
Right.
So I have a question for you. If Galuli's statement was correct, why is it that not only you, but 30 other uniform division officers appear in the Starr report? What's the rationale behind her statement?
So basically, Jan Gahuli's statement and the Retired Agents Association statement is basically trying to make me look bad and call me a liar. They know what happened. The first thing I say to you, on top of what you just said, of all the officers that were subpoenaed, why was I subpoenaed 6 times? And the ideal, and here's one of the things, we mentioned earlier when I was talking about the Secret Service and how the director was trying to change their management style. This is one of the reasons, because these guys have such a hatred for the uniform division. Because here's the truth, and all you have to do is go on YouTube to prove me right, and look at pictures on YouTube or video of the White House complex, and there's hundreds of them on there. The Secret Service Uniform Division does most of the protection of the President of the United States at the White House. And that's what the agents don't want to admit. The agents are in charge of the protection, but the Uniform Division officers do all the fixed posts around the fence line. They do all the fixed posts inside. When the President moves from the Oval Office back to the mansion, the agents go with him, and the Uniform Division officers on fixed post all through that route. They do the counter snipers. They do the bomb sniffing dogs. Everything in my book, in Crisis of Character especially, because it's more of my life, is true. Who would write a book like that and not tell the truth? You know, Crisis of Character is really a memoir of what happened to me. It's of my life. These guys came out because they're supporters of Hillary Clinton. And I actually pursued slander and defamation, a suit against them, but it was going to become too expensive and I let it go. But they also, they never retracted their statements, but they stopped slandering me. As soon as I said I was looking at a suit, they stopped slandering me. I would love to, and I tried to arrange this for somebody with a TV show to have us all on at the same time and let me defend myself, but of course they wouldn't do that. The ideal that the uniform division isn't right around the first family is ridiculous, and all you have to do is read my book to see that, and the proof is there. And there's many pictures, even online, of uniform division officers standing right next to protectees. That's the truth. That's the way it is. Those are the facts. And again, if it's not true, then why was I subpoenaed 6 times? And then why did the Supreme Court Justice Rehnquist order me to testify or go to jail? These guys are trying to protect the Secret Service agent image. They're almost like the Clintons trying to protect their brand. They're trying to protect the persona that Secret Service agents are a cross between a James Bond character and a Clint Eastwood movie character. And that's not reality. Listen, they're generally good people. They start out that way. Certainly as they move up into the executive level, they lose sight. These guys that slandered me, they don't know me from Adam, and they despise the uniform division, and that's clear. And the fact that they wouldn't address me in person, in public, on one of these shows just shows you that they're just cowards themselves. I'll be glad to entertain any questions you have along those lines. I'm fine. And the more combative, the better off it is for me. So.
Right. I was just noticing that because when you move through the White House, and obviously people have this mystique about the Secret Service, but if somebody stops you in a suit, you don't necessarily know if they're a Secret Service agent or if they are, a guy working for George Stephanopoulos, let's say.
Well, if you worked there, you would. The agents would have a pass on. You would know who they were. Of course, the uniform division guys are in uniform, but generally speaking, it's the uniform division that enforces the security there. I mean, don't get me wrong. Agents, absolutely, if they see somebody that doesn't have a pass, they can say something to them, but generally they don't, because a lot of them don't want to ruffle the staff's feathers, and they leave it up to the uniform division to, you've read the books, you know the stories in there. So, but anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, we're gonna get to some more books too, because even your interesting video in response to some of these people, but Dan Bongino's book, which I do listen to his radio show, which is pretty good.
Yes.
And I've listened to your podcast as well sometimes. But I think from his book, it seems as if a lot of the work of the agents is also prepping the president or the vice president's security on the road more, or in the moving situation. And you guys are kind of the more static, keeping the White House structure, so to speak. And therefore, if they were to negate that role, I guess the security model wouldn't really make sense, because you don't have agents, especially according to, I think it was Secrets of the Secret Service. You don't have agents necessarily patrolling all the time back then. I think later they increased the agent patrols with the police office or the UD officers, but I believe you said that the agents for a long time never had arrest privileges.
They don't. They don't have regular privilege. They don't make arrests like regular police officers, because they're federal agents. They make arrests that are. They generally, unless it happens right in front of them, like they can't write speeding tickets, they can't write traffic tickets, where the uniform division officers have all the authority of the metropolitan police officers and all the authority of federal police law, and then they can enforce it anywhere the U.S. flag flies. Where the agents are federal agents, they're trained to do investigation. Their authority is a little bit different. Don't get me wrong, if they witness an assault, they can absolutely stop them, but technically they're not arresting them. They're stopping them. They're waiting until a police officer makes the arrest. They'll be the first witness, of course. When they make arrests during counterfeit, it's because they have a subpoena or a warrant for people's arrest and for equipment. So it's a little bit different. But you brought up a good point. This is what drove the wedge, what helps drive the wedge in between the agents and the uniform division. Because as you mentioned, they tried to put us in the same patrol vehicle back in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's, and it's not just the agent's fault. It's the uniform division guys can give it as good as they get, believe me, when it comes to busting chops. And pulling people's chains. And they would, it got to the point where in one particular case, this officer drives the agent to the local metropolitan district, 3D. They walk inside and walks up to the sergeant and says, "Can you give this Secret Service agent a ticket book?" And he said, "No, he's not a police officer." And the guy got furious. And that's pretty much when they separated the patrols again. And the agents have a patrol called Prowler, and then the Uniform Division patrol was called Hailstone. So, but again, they both pull each other's chains. But the bottom line is that the agents are in charge of managing us, and they're doing a terrible job. And the way you saw these guys treat me when my book came out, they don't know me from Adam. And the first thing they do is call me a liar. They slander me. He couldn't possibly had the access. And the first question, whoever was interviewing them should say, well, if he couldn't have had the access, why was he subpoenaed 6 times? And what about this picture of him standing next to the president? Or what about the way he describes this? Even the lawyers in the Secret Service, and I'm sure you read this, but just to kind of finalize this up, when the Lewinsky investigation broke into the public, and we started having to give testimony and information to the Secret Service lawyers and the Justice Department lawyers that were representing the Secret Service to the Starr investigation, they didn't have a clear. The lawyers, the Secret Service lawyers, and the Justice Department's lawyers, their clearance wasn't even high enough for myself and my coworkers to tell them what we did at our posts. They had to go and take a tour and learn certain things about the job and about their clearances that we couldn't even tell them. So and their attitude towards us was kind of like these two agents was. They kind of rolled their eyes at us when they started asking us questions. But when they did their due diligence, they realized that the Uniform Division has a huge amount of responsibility. And never recognized for it. So. Sure. Sure.
Hi, I'm Gary Byrne. I wrote the book Crisis of Character, and my latest book is Secrets of the Secret Service. One of the first criticisms I got when Crisis of Character came out was two former Secret Service agents, Jane Cahooley and Jonathan Wackrow, came out and attacked me and called me a liar. And one of the things they tried to say, which was ridiculous at the time, was that people in their Secret Service, real people that were in the Secret Service, real Secret Service agents or whatever, I was in the Uniform Division, don't write books. In front of you, you see these stacks of books. I'm not building my own wall to keep anybody out. These are the stacks of books that we used as references and research for my second book, Secrets of the Secret Service. This stack right here, the first director of the Secret Service, it would have been called a chief, wrote a book about the Secret Service. This is the book from the second chief of the Secret Service. This is the book from a chief or director of the Secret Service. His name was Frank Wilson. Here's another book by Starling, a former chief of the Secret Service. Here's a book by Riley, a former chief or director of the Secret Service. Here's another one by Rufus Youngblood, who became a deputy director and was probably one of the toughest men the Secret Service ever hired. No BS. This is by the chief of the Secret Service. And this book is written by a woman named Maria Good. What's her name, Grant? Good-avage. It's a very good book, a very true book about the Secret Service K-9 program. The reason I highlight this is because there's a forward in here by two former Secret Service agents, which means that she got the okay from the Secret Service to write this book. Otherwise, she wouldn't have got the help that she did writing the book. It's an excellent book. I recommend it. But here's the thing. When they talk about these two agents in here that highlight themselves in the book, as they were the agents that were responsible for bringing the Uniform Division K-9 program forward, who building it. What they don't tell you is, after they're finished patting themselves on the back, is they didn't give the K-9 officers vehicles to transport the dogs, so they had to use their own dogs. And for 7 years, they took care of those dogs on their own time and didn't get paid for it. So that's the typical Secret Service. That's the real Secret Service. They started this program. If the K-9 people handling these dogs were agents, they would have had valets and take-home cars. But because they were Uniform Division, they not only did not give them take-home cars till they got in front of a judge, but they also didn't pay them to take care of the dogs at home, which is unheard of in any law enforcement K-9 program. That's the real Secret Service. So
And they had to take them to court over that.
Yes, and they had to take them to court, and it took 7 years. And these officers ruined many of their own vehicles. But let's go back to the books that nobody who was real Secret Service write books. You see all these books in front of me? 2 of them are Dan Bongino's, who's a very famous former Secret Service agent, who I happen to like very much. 2 of his books are in here. These are all books about the Secret Service. Some of the other books are books written by other people who were instrumental in my research. This is a book by Howie Carr, who writes about the Kennedys. Howie Carr's book brought a lot of what the Kennedys were really like and how hard John F. Kennedy made it hard for them to protect, the Secret Service to protect.
And he used interviews from Secret Service
Right,
agents.
he actually interviewed former Secret Service agents. All these books, even if they're not written by a Secret Service agent, the interviews are by Secret Service agents. And most of the time they do state their names. And one of the more famous ones is former director Louis Marletti. Tells a story in a book that somebody wrote and Lou interviewed for it, and tells the story about how Clinton almost got himself blown up. Which one?
It's the American Virtue.
Here you go, American Virtue.
So big, very few people have read it.
Where Lou Marletti, publicly stated without being threatened, information about the Secret Service. So anybody tells you that if you were former Secret Service that you shouldn't write a book, BS. Tell your story. Get it out there. That's what freedom of speech is.
Some honorable mentions, perhaps?
Honorable mentions. The story about Jimmy Hoffa. I hear you paint houses. This is about the guy who says he killed Jimmy Hoffa. I believe he did. It's a great story. His name.
Actually, I don't think anybody could hear me before, so I think Gary could only hear me. But there is a small part where he talks about this book, which I have in the mail right now.
Jam. He was involved in the Watergate.
So hold on.
Scandal, but great book. Total piece of crap. Biggest piece of fiction since Little Red Riding Hood. The Three Pigs have more real shit in it than this book does. The reason I have it is because somebody contacted myself and Grant and asked me to do an interview about her book. So I felt obliged to buy it, and I bought it.
All right, that was his that was his reaction to what happened. Yeah, we're going to talk a little about the Clintons in a second. I guess since everybody keeps asking her, I mean, why not ask you as well? What was how it is that she lost the election? But there are a couple more questions first.
Sure.
So related to that video, my main question resulting from this is how you would contrast your attitude in your books to similar recent accounts by agents Bongino and Emmett. From my reading, Bongino appears to have become more politically motivated by his experiences under President Obama, where he was a protective detail agent, whereas Dan Emmett seems almost at pains not to be critical of his protected persons in any way.
Yeah. So I know them both. as I told you before, I know Dan. I knew Dan Bongino a little bit. I knew him. I met him in training a couple times just before I left. He was coming in as an instructor, and then I've actually gotten to know him pretty well since my books have come out. We've talked on the phone a couple times. I've bounced things off him. There was actually a story I was thinking about adding to Secrets of the Secret Service, but it kind of involved a family member of Dan's. And before I did it, I wanted to talk to him about it. He's a very nice guy. Dan Emmett, again, a very nice guy. Dan Emmett, I will tell you, is, in my opinion, the poster child for the Secret Service agent. This guy's was a former Marine Corps officer. He was a fabulous guy. I worked with him and his wife. So Dan Emmett wrote his books, told his story without being critical. Yeah, excellent book.
Arm's length.
Yeah. And the funny thing is I didn't even know he wrote that until we started researching Secrets of Crisis of Character, and I was flabbergasted. And just to show you what a decent guy this guy is, he contacts me on Facebook about 2 months after Crisis of Character comes out, congratulates me, what a great job, asks me how I'm doing. He's just a decent guy. And he is a hard charger, Dan Emmett. They both are. Emmett's probably 10 or 15 years older than Bongino. Dan's young compared to Emmett and myself. But both hard chargers. The thing that motivates Dan Bongino a little bit more is that he's a real strict conservative. And he saw things protecting President Obama that convinced him that he needed to run for politics and he needed to try to change some of this. And it didn't work out. As you know, he ran, I believe, 2 times for 2 different seats and it didn't work out. But he certainly found his place in the world, talking about conservative philosophies and basically calling BS on things that he knows for a fact aren't true, or especially when it comes to the Secret Service. I've actually done some radio shows with Dan Emmett, with Dan Bongino, and again, classy guy, very nice, smart. One of the things that I'll never be able to do is I can do talk shows like this with you, and like the other talk shows I've done, but to do the commentary that Bongino does and have that quick wit, I'm just not wired that way. I admire them both, I really do. But the thing about Dan Emmett that always, I knew Dan Emmett for years. I must have met him in 1991 or 2 when I first started, and then I met his wife a couple of years later. He's the guy. Dan Emmett is the like I said, the poster child for the Secret Service, for the Marine Corps. This guy is a gentleman. He's courteous. He is diligent. He can work out like nobody's. But even today, he's probably still a PT animal. And like I said, I'm 50, just turned 56. He's got to be, around that age. And just a great guy, a smart agent. Somebody. And he was not one of these guys that, agents that I worked with that were kind of hostile towards the uniform division, whether they said they were joking or not. I called them UD bashers. Emmett was not a UD basher. You know what? He had been an officer in the Marine Corps. He saw the uniform division like enlisted men. He treated us with a lot of dignity. Very good guy.
So when I read his book, Within Arm's Length, which I actually can't maximize the screen, so you'll just have to squint. So the thing is that he did seem a little resistive of talking about whether it was President Clinton or any of the other people. Did he object in any way to you having a book such as Crisis of Character, or did he sound understanding?
I think I can't speak for him, but if I am going to speak for him, I see it like this. I did what I did. My experiences were different than his and anybody else's. I think I said this to you before, either in an interview or in private before, was that I kind of feel like I have a little bit of a hall pass because after being subpoenaed 6 times and then being ripped apart by the Democratic Clinton machine and even parts of the Secret Service. Again, the Secret Service Retired Agents Association came out and slandered us during the investigation. I mean, you just can't stop these guys. The Secret Service agents were trying to push the Uniform Division guys forward to protect themselves. And the agents at the Retired Association were calling us liars and said we could have never seen what we saw. And the Secret Service director had to call them and tell them to shut up. Otherwise, these senior agents were going to have to testify. That just tells you how crazy it got. But I'm painting a bad picture of all agents, and I'm not. If you think I am, like I said, they're not all Dan Emmons and Dan Bonginos, but most of them are close to that. There's some jackasses. There are, but nobody's perfect. I'm sure we have some guys in the Uniform Division again that pull their chains, and even I myself, when working with an agent one time who was, constantly busting my chops about being Uniform Division. When the opportunity came up to get his attention and to show him that, he didn't understand really what he was doing at the White House yet, I did. And it changed the whole relationship. And basically, I got his attention. But so back to Dan Emmett, you were talking about. Yeah, he's like I said, he's a gentleman's gentleman. He didn't want to break his oath, but he wanted to tell his story. I feel like I didn't really break my oath because
you'd already testified anyway, right?
Right. Most of this is public knowledge, but the oath, there was no confidentiality agreement at the time, and the oath is to the Constitution and to the office of the presidency, not to these individuals. And I've told you this before, and I'll say it here to your audience tonight. Am I uncomfortable with it? I absolutely was. I still always will be. Part of me thinks it was wrong, but again, my main motivation of writing Crisis of Character, the first book, was to get the truth out about Hillary. Like I told you, vote for her, don't vote for her, but this is who the real woman was, the real person was, and she's destructive and incompetent. And that's what my goal was, set out to get the truth out, and I did.
Well, yeah, and I'm thankful that I wish there were, in the atmosphere we have now, and there's going to be another question coming up,
sure,
some later, but in the atmosphere we have now, I think it is better that we have a little more transparency at least. A couple more questions about the Secret Service itself. Abraham Bolden was the first black U.S. Secret Service agent to serve in the Presidential Protective Detail and served under President Kennedy. He has alleged that there was a Chicago plot to kill Kennedy, and also that his concerns ahead of the president's Dallas visit were ignored and even ridiculed with racial epithets, which we can't say on YouTube.
Right.
During your research, did you find anything to support or contradict Bolden's claims?
Absolutely. So we read Grant read Bolden's book, and he was so moved by it that I read it. And we try not to, there's not many books. We read about, as you saw in that pile, we read a little over 40 books. We tried to split it in half. Bolden's book moved me, and I believe it's absolutely true, because not so much based on other research, but based on my experiences in the Secret Service. I'm not going to, listen, this agency tries to do a good job. They've got management issues, but to try to say that back in the 1960s, that they didn't have racial issues is insane. I'm telling you, they did, because they had them when I got there, and they may still have them to a certain part in a small portion. Bigotry can raise its head anywhere. I believe everything that guy said in the book because it rang true. And one of the reasons they went to such extent to slander him and try to prosecute him later on for trumped up charges was because he told the truth about what happened the night of the couple days around the Kennedy assassination. These guys were out the night before to 5 o'clock in the morning. Some of them were still intoxicated that morning. Most of them were still hungover. And I can kind of prove this to you to a certain extent. And I know you've watched the Zapruder film. Tell your guests to watch your guests to watch the Zapruder film. And there's two people that you see there's one person you see do the right thing. Clint Hill. Thank you, Clint Hill, who runs from the follow-up vehicle to the vehicle that the president and the first lady were in. He did the right thing. The guy that you don't see, was Vice President Johnson's lead agent. And as I'm talking to you, his name will pop into my head here in a minute. But this guy was a World War II veteran. He been a gunner on a B-17. This guy may have been one of the toughest guys the Secret Service ever trained and designed. He hears the first shot. He leaps up in the front seat of the car, spins around, jumps over that bar, and pushes the vice president and his wife down on the floor and lays on top of him. Everybody else, when you watch that film, those first 3.5 seconds, they're all looking around in a daze. That definitely goes into what I experienced in the Secret Service of the party attitude. Absolutely, I believe what Bolden said in his book. I believe, I believe that my hypothesis of their actions based on what he said, when you look at that film, the only guy that really does the right thing right away is Clint Hill. And, he never forgave himself for not saving them, but he couldn't. The Secret Service made a lot of mistakes. And I'll go ahead and say this right now, if you don't mind. And I come to this conclusion in Secrets of the Secret Service. The reason John Kennedy was killed, separated from any conspiracy theories, that's not the issue. The issue is that the Secret Service mistakes, incompetence, and their partying the night before, they left the window open big enough to stick a rifle out of, and a very angry Marine trained guy with a shitty gun blew his head off. That's what happened. You can connect any other conspiracy theory and I don't mean to make that sound negative. I know them all too. I've studied them all. I find some of them fascinating. But the bottom line is incompetence and bad behavior and bad procedures at the time killed this guy.
Right, and I think it's unfair to ask somebody, to solve the entire issue of what happened. But I think, and I'm going to plan on, when I get a chance to read Bolden's account, because there are other ones that I saw on your list that were very interesting ones, and indeed there's like a whole world of information about the Secret Service that
but nobody writes a book about the Secret Service, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's haram, as they say in Arabic.
Yes.
Yeah. So, question about the Bush family. First Lady Barbara Bush passed away in April. I am critical of the Bush family. I'm not all, I'd probably say that they're one of the reasons I'm agnostic politically. As a whole, the Bush family has had a poor relationship with current President Donald Trump. You said in Crisis of Character that you had a great relationship with the elder George Bush. Will you comment on meeting his children, George W. and Jeb, and what is your feeling about their feud with Donald Trump?
Sure, I will talk about their children. The Bush family is a very nice family. I mean, I don't agree with everything they've done in politics, and we won't get into that now. But I liked them. They were nice people. They were kind people. They understood what the Secret Service was doing for them, what the military did for them. They were, when I say kind, that doesn't even, and not just, I refer to George Herbert Walker Bush and Barbara Bush as Mom and Pop Bush, Papa Bush and Mom Bush, because they were the first Bushes I protected. And then, of course, I protected their son, years later, for a couple of years before I transferred into the Air Marshals. The whole family was very nice, even to the point, just to give you an idea of how kind these people were. I'll try to make this as short story as possible. I had my family in the White House one time on a Saturday, giving my parents a tour. I was working, I had a break, my family was there, and I was taking them through the public tour. I was pretty new to the job. And one of the officers recognizes me and sees that I have my family. So he lets me behind the barricade into the ground floor where the diplomatic reception room is. And all the other tourists are on the other side of the partitions, and we're back there. Well, while we're standing there, and again, it's the early 90s, George H.W. Bush is president, the grandkids come running down the steps, and there's like 6 or 7 of them, and they go running past us. Well, one of them bumps into my mother and, turns around and keeps running. And at the time, this is before iPods and iPhones. What 2 of them were wearing was the original Sony Walkmans, remember, with the big yellow earphones? And yeah, so they run into my mother, and one of the housemen sees this, and he tells Mrs. Bush, Barbara Bush. She comes down and finds us and apologizes to my mother. I was like mortified because I'm new, and I'm like, I'm gonna get fired because I'm technically not supposed to be back here. But my buddies let me through, and she actually said to myself and my mother, she said, my children are not raising their children with the discipline that we raised them with. And I always thought that was great. And I mean, don't get me wrong, the grandkids and her kids weren't bad. It's just, it was one of those things. And she treated the people's house like her house, but then treated you as a guest that it was your house too. It's hard to describe how great they were. I tell many stories, as you know. And George W. was the same way, and his wife. They were very kind. They were very nice. It was a good experience. It certainly was. Again, I don't agree with all their politics. What was the other part of the question?
So they do have that feud with Donald Trump, which
Right.
I find amusing, but
So do I.
So I personally the one thing that I think Trump has done that is certainly torn up all the cards is he doesn't stick to these conventions, and he'll call people, he'll tell people what he thinks about them, and whether it's right or wrong. So
Right.
has that kind of caused like an internal conflict with you? Because I mean, you knew President Bush and
Yeah.
his dad.
Yeah. Yeah. It has a little bit, but I have seen behind the curtain so much. Now, to keep this in factual perspective, I never protected President Trump, but I protected both the Bushes and many, many other people, not just presidents, but former presidents. But to get to the heart of your question, yeah, it makes me a little uncomfortable. But I also found it refreshing during the Republican primaries when President Trump called these guys out for who they really are. When he referred to Jeb Bush as low energy, I didn't really feel bad for Jeb. I felt bad for his parents, but I found it a little humorous because having been around them, and don't get me wrong, I thought he was a good governor in Florida. I don't live in Florida, but I thought he did some good things. And being around him and seeing him in as a person, with his family, doing family things, he's a good, decent man. Am I very excited that President Trump is the way he is? I don't want to. Here's the thing. I'm afraid if he softens up his language and he changes who he is, that he might actually change. And I don't want that. I like what he's doing. He may use a crowbar where tweezers are needed, but the reason he's in office right now, and we're even discussing this, is because all these other politicians, the Bushes included, and many politicians like them, Republicans that we call rhinos that are only Republicans for 15 minutes every 4 or 6 years when they want to get reelected. And I'm not
Democrats.
Right, or Democrats who, how many times were conservatives and Republicans told, give us the House, give us the Senate, give us the White House. And now we have all three, and they're standing on the feet of the guy who got there. I'm sorry he beat up those 16 people, but he did. And then he whooped Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Vice President Biden, and anybody else that tried to jump in there and derail him. The guy is a champion. And do I agree with everything? No. Am I comfortable with it all? Absolutely. I look at the economy. Was I uncomfortable for the Bush family? Yes, and I understand that. They're dignified people. They're old school manners. President Trump is a little bit rough around the edges about those things. Do I think we needed that in politics? Yes. And I would like to add one more thing. I'm stunned that somebody has gotten to the office of the presidency that acts like that. But the reason he's there, and he's going to stay there, and he's going to probably do 8 years, I'm convinced he'll get reelected. But I will warn your audience that I'm the worst politic predictor, because I swore up and down Bill Clinton would never get elected and never get reelected. So don't go by me. But I like what he's doing. I support him. Was I uncomfortable with his treatment of the Bush family? Yeah. And I was even a little bit thrown off with his comment about John McCain. I understand why he said it, but saying it publicly bothered me a little bit. But you know what? Maybe I have a thin skin when it comes to that type of thing.
So President Clinton, who is, in terms of, well, I've read more books about President Clinton than anybody.
Sure, you mentioned.
And I can't get enough of it. It might be some sort of mental illness or something. But during our first discussion in January, you stated that your personal experience with President Clinton was at times pleasant, frequently pleasant, in fact. Yet with then First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton, her behavior was condescending and at times hostile. What was your impression of Hillary and Bill Clinton's behavior towards other White House staff, military aides, FBI, and law enforcement, apart from the Secret Service? Do you
Right.
believe either one of them had a paranoia complex, as some have alleged?
Yeah.
According to Gary Aldrich of the FBI, who I'll show his book in a second. It's at the bottom of the pile. Craig Livingston, who was the security guy for the Clintons, even claimed at one time that the Clintons were exploring dumping the Secret Service protection in favor of the FBI. So
Yeah.
that's a long question, but
It is,
go ahead.
but actually, you know what? I'm not sure there's a better subject. The only person that's probably a better subject matter expert is that guy that wrote the book you're holding up. Before I answer the question, I want to kind of throw a shout out to Gary Aldridge. I'm going to tell you something. He wrote that book in the early 90s when I was still there, and I never read it, and I'm glad I didn't because it would have confused my memory writing my first book because some of our experiences were very similar. First, let me start with the president and Mrs. Clinton and their behavior. President Clinton, the way I described to you how he treated me, he treated everybody. Did I see him scream and yell at raise his voice at people when he got angry, when things were really crappy? Yes. He lashed out at me one time just because I was in the proximity. But I will tell you something. Here's the difference between him and his wife. About 25 minutes later, after he calmed down and fixed the problem or looked at whatever it was that made him angry, he came back out in the hallway. Now, don't misunderstand me. He didn't come out and say, I apologize. He came out and he said, how's it going today, officer? And I said, just fine, Mr. President. How are you doing? He said, well, things are getting a little heated today. And I said, well, you know what? Not every day's ice cream and, bananas. And he laughed and that's the way he always engaged the uniform division guys and the agents. And, like I described him to you before, I like the way he behaved to people, when he treated people, like that. Would I trust him to drive my 27-year-old niece home? No, absolutely not. But he was a decent guy to work around, where she was not. The only time she was decent is when you could do something for her. If you were a high-end person, you were there, a contributor. And Mrs. Clinton, as I described in my book, she could easily be triggered, to become angry. And the stories I've talked about. She lashed out at the military people, at Secret Service agents, at myself. And the story I told before, where she actually struck one of the agents in the back of the head with a Bible, sitting in the limousine. She's a very, very angry person. She is everybody. She's exactly how I defined her, how I described her in my book. And then I'm pretty sure you remember this, but about 2-3 months after my book came out, WikiLeaks released documents that they had gotten a hold of that were FBI investigation documents from the FBI investigation into something that happened at the State Department. And when they interviewed the State Department agents, they described her the same way I did. They described it as being an agent assigned to her detail as punishment, that she was so angry all the time and she treated them like crap. And they described the same behavior 15, 20 years apart. So that's who the real Hillary Clinton is. What was the other part of the question?
So I'll ask the other part again, but just before you continue,
Sure.
there are people. Michael Medved, who's on the radio, always says that she's a kind of a nice lady, and obviously she has friends. Everybody has some friends. In fact, some people
Sure.
think that some people say that Bill Clinton has almost no actual friends, but she does. But it's different the way you act to your friends as opposed to people that I guess she would have defined people like yourself or Aldrich or Stephanopoulos as employees.
Right.
So yeah.
Right.
The other part of the question was, do you believe that either her or President Clinton had a paranoia complex towards law enforcement? That Aldrich did say that Craig Livingston, who was later fired, he was the head of security, the Office of Security at the White House, but he was a political appointee. He said he was going to dissolve the Secret Service detail and replace them with FBI people. So
Right.
Is that consistent with your description of her? Did she distrust people like yourself or
Yeah.
FBI people?
Yeah, which is really funny saying it now because I wrote the books. But or wrote certainly the first book. Yeah, she did. They had a real bad paranoia about us. And a good example of that is about 3 years before he gets elected, the Bush administration installs a new telephone system. It was AT&T system. It was called Merlin, I think, was the name of the phone system, and it was this very elaborate, state-of-the-art phone system at the time. And they had it installed about 3 years before the Clintons got there. So they get in the office, and the reason I know this for a fact is because I did one of the escorts for the AT&T guy when they had to switch the system out. I know these people, AT&T or whatever they're called now, the phone company, Verizon. They have two or three technicians on duty at the White House complex all the time, especially during the daytime. And if they need one over 24 hours, they do. So we knew these people. We escorted them. Anyway, this guy told me that when the Clintons got in there, and the Gores had a little bit of paranoia too, Vice President Gore, and they were convinced that the Republican Party was tapping them on these phones. So they wanted to replace the phone system, even though the phone technicians brought in somebody to explain to them that it was impossible. But they wouldn't buy it. So they replaced the phone. They order the phone system replaced. This is where, to me, it gets really funny. They order the phone system replaced. So they do. It takes a couple months. All this expensive equipment, all these new servers, all that, very complicated stuff. They get it all done. They teach the staff how to use it. And then AT&T comes back and says, okay, that's $25 million. And they're like, what? Yeah, it's $25 million. And they go, well, who paid you before? They go, well, there was a contract. There was a contract. There was a bid. You just told it. You ordered us directly. Here's the letter to replace the phone system. You owe us $25 million. And they didn't have the money to pay for it. So, that's how crazy it was,
Yeah, I heard like before I think there's only 3 more questions. I know we're going long.
It's fine.
I'm sorry, but
good.
I do remember that. I don't remember. It might have been Dick Morris who said that within like 2 months, Hillary Clinton bankrupted her budget for events or whatever the hell they call it. It was like hilarious. I think they effed up the lawn pretty bad one time.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, they used to put they had these big events, and they were so big they couldn't have them in the mansion. So they put these big air-conditioned tents outside in the summer. And, of course, the tents would kill all the grass. But, the first event they had, and then they had the second event, and the contractor, they call up the same contractor, and he says, no problem, as soon as you pay me for the first event. So they go to the White House Usher's office, who manages the budget there, and he goes, your budget is $50,000 a year. You went through that a month ago. I don't have any money to pay these guys. The Democratic Party is going to have to pay for it. So they had to change some things around and kind of bend they had to kind of make it a state function so the State Department could make it more of a state function than a political function, so the State Department budget would help pay for it. So, yes, it's a little crooked, but that's just one of many things. I wanted to mention how Gary Aldridge's book, this guy was very brave to write it at the time, and I'm so glad that eventually his book did well. I actually reached out to him right after my first book came out, and I found him on Facebook, and we just had to, exchange a couple words, and I told him how great I thought his book was. But anyway, incredibly brave when he wrote that book, and his book is 100% factual. I mean, some of the stuff that he has in there, I was there when it happened. And that's why I'm so glad that I didn't read his book before I wrote mine. So, but the paranoia was obvious. It wasn't just the phone thing. It was also the way she would berate people and other things that would happen, with her staff and how paranoid they were about certain things. And there's I tell a story about Vice President Gore's paranoia if you wanted to hear that. But
yeah, I think was that the one with the lamp or the overhead fixture.
The smoke detectors. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that was pretty well. I mean, maybe if you're willing at the end, we can do that one.
Sure.
So, what's the next one? Okay. Last time we discussed White House Deputy Counsel Vince Foster's unfortunate and untimely death. Bill Clinton fired FBI Director William Sessions on July 19, 1993, a day before Foster's death. did you and fellow Secret Service staff or other people at the White House find the firing to be suspicious? Why was this event not as well covered as was the more recent firing of Director James Comey?
Well, the reason it wasn't covered, the reason it's being covered different now is because you've got a Republican that nobody wanted, no Republican or Democrat wanted in the White House. When you go back to the Clintons, um, Bill Clinton fired Sessions because Sessions was a tough guy, an FBI agent. He was a tough cookie. They wanted to get somebody in there younger that they felt like was more their age group. That's why they picked Louis Freeh. And I have nothing against Louis Freeh. And there was some other, I can't remember exactly what it was. Maybe you do. But there was something else with Sessions. They asked Sessions to do something, and he told them no, that he wouldn't do it, that it was against the law.
To my knowledge, the reason was that, and this is why they say that there's a nexus with Foster, and I know that I can't, because you weren't involved directly in the Foster investigation, so I'm not going to ask you to comment on that.
Sure.
However, the fact is that Bill Sessions was being pressured to drop the Whitewater investigation.
That's what it was.
And he was like, no, I mean, I have, I mean, there's people at different levels of my department that are doing it. So, I mean, I think he actually said that, you know, he wanted, well, they never gave him a direct order to drop it, but they made it clear that if he would not drop it, you know, they weren't going to keep him. And then there was this investigation that implicated him for some, you know, misuse of funds at the FBI, and
Which
it gave a proper pretext to fire him.
Right.
So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add this to you because it kind of answers a little bit of the other questions. You talked about Craig Livingston, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Craig Livingston was just a bouncer that Mrs. Clinton liked. And I knew him personally a little bit as far as work goes. And here's what he told me. He told me personally that he was hired by Hillary Clinton because during the campaign against Bush, H.W. Bush, he dressed up in a chicken costume and rode around in this van, this opposition van, and he would run through the crowd and call George Bush, who was a World War II war hero.
And pilot, yeah.
A pilot, right, who was shot down by the Japanese and left at sea and was, you know, rescued eventually by the U.S. But he was calling him a chicken because he wouldn't debate Bill Clinton. And so anyway, that's Livingston's claim to fame. And so he gets in there and they elevate his position. The original position that he was in was just like a clerk's position who was in charge of helping the staff get their clearances. And they elevated it up. And he was like a kind of like a child man type thing. And one of the things they would do, and this is, I'm getting back to Sessions, they had, you know, they used him as Craig as he would go to Sessions and say, this is what they want, you know, and you better give it to them. And of course he didn't, so they fired him. And then you talked about earlier where Aldridge insinuated that Livingston tried to intimidate the Secret Service by saying they wanted to give the protection to the FBI. Well, believe it or not, you just can't do that. That's an act of Congress. But there was a history of Hoover trying to do that. And eventually, right after Kennedy got shot, he changed his mind about it. But my point is, Livingston tried to do these. He manipulated these agencies. He would try to intimidate Aldridge by saying, "Oh, I talked to your boss this morning, Louis Freeh," like he was on a first name basis. Where Aldridge did not, you know, had a chain of command. He couldn't just pick up the phone and call the director, where this guy could because he was sort of elevated White House staff. So he tried to manipulate these guys, is my point, and he did.
I would say, you know, just before we segue into the next question, I think one of the reasons that the Comey firing is a lot more famous is also because of the 24/7 news cycle.
Yes.
And Comey was well known before he was fired. I mean, William Sessions, to be honest with you, I think I only found his name after reading about, you know, the Clintons 2 years ago.
Right.
So, Mr. Trump, Donald H. Trump, is accused of collusion with Russia by nearly everyone with a blue check mark by his name on Twitter. Very
Right.
few Americans are aware of President Clinton's acceptance of, hold on, again, it's at the bottom of the pile,
Yeah.
acceptance of campaign donations from the People's Republic of China.
Yes.
God bless them, but
They were
it's a
fined like $430 $430,000 for their fines. For,
yeah. Here it says, even fewer speak out about it and call attention to the open source evidence of collusion between Bill Clinton, the DNC, and I'm just reading myself because I can't shut up about it. And Chinese government officials like Lieutenant Colonel Liu Chaoying. Were you aware or suspicious of the appearance of so many Chinese officials at the time in the White House? For example, in 1996, he received John Huang and James Riady in the White House, where they delivered cash envelopes to the president on behalf of Chinese straw donors. Huang
yes.
was later convicted of illegal campaign donations. He served, I think, community service. And Riady was fined $8.6 million in 2001.
Right. Yeah. So there's I'm not sure how to tell you this part of the story. It's just kind of funny. So I never like when I was writing the book, I purposely left this story out. So one day I'm at work, and I'm going to tell it to you in two ways as quick as I can. I'm at work one day, and I come on post in the morning. I look at the schedule that's posted for us on my post, and it says that President Clinton is meeting with officials from China. And just about the time I finish reading it, my phone rings, and it's the direct line from the Secret Service's Technical Services Division. And a guy says, "Hey, Gary, it's so and so. How you doing this morning?" I said, "Fine." He said, "Listen, do you see the schedule where it says these are Chinese officials?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "They're not. They're Chinese generals." He goes, "They've been in, and clearly somebody in the federal government was tracking them because he knew when they'd come into the country, where they were staying." He said, "I'm just giving you a heads up. They're Chinese generals, and tonight after they leave, we want you to pay attention to where they go. If they go anywhere out of the ordinary in the Oval Office, we want you to let us know." And I said, "Of course." And there's certain reasons they're calling. It's not me personally. It's because I'm at that post outside the Oval Office, and there's certain reasons that I won't go into, security reasons. But they know that we know what they do, and so anyway. So a little while later, these guys show up. Well, actually, a little while later, Betty Carey calls me.
The White House secretary?
Yeah, wait, let me back up. A little while later, the officers out at the Northwest Gate call me, and they go, "Hey, what's going on in there?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "There's these Chinese generals out here." I think it was 5 of them. And he said, "They won't let us search these bags." And I said, "Well, don't let them in." And I hung up the phone. And then a couple minutes later, Betty Carey calls me, and she says, "Hey, there's a problem out at the gate with the president's guests. Can you fix this for us?" Which was a very common thing. It's how I built the bond that I did with them. And I said, "Yeah, let me see what's going on." So I call my relief guy. He comes over and relieves me. I walk out to the gate, and I said, "What's up?" And they said, "Well, they won't let us. They won't put these bags in the X-ray machine." So the sergeant was standing there, and I just said out loud to the State Department guy, and the sergeant agreed with me. I said, "Well, you can't bring the bags in. They can come in, but you can't bring the bags in unless they're X-rayed." So they X-ray these bags, and they were full of money. They were full of $100 bills. Now, I never was going to tell this story because I thought if there was one thing that was going to get me into one car Arkansas suicide, that would be the story. But as we're doing the research, we discover that people did know about this. But before I knew people knew about it, when I was researching the second book, I'm interviewing with Alex Jones. You know who he is?
I mean, everybody. I mean, Alex Jones is a wonderful entertainer. I love him.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's very good to me. He's a great guy, and the people that he works with, I've been interviewed by them a lot. So anyway, he's interviewing me, and everything's going really good. And again, I can't tell you how much I thought that story was taboo at the time. I mean, I'd have sooner talked about my personal relationship with my wife. You know what I mean? So anyway, he all of a sudden he says, "Hey, Gary, did you see any Chinese generals in the West Wing while you were there?" And I'm telling you, my face, I don't remember what the expression was, but clearly, like, if I was a poker player, I'd have lost. And so I'm like, and this is one of the things I like about Alex Jones. He may ask you a crazy UFO question, or, and I'm just using that as an example. Not that it's true, but as an example. But when he sees you're uncomfortable, he switches back, and So anyway, and he changes the subject. So when I'm done, I close the Skype and I call Grant right away. I'm like, holy crap, Alex Jones knows about the Chinese guys and the money. So anyway, as we were doing our research, we realized that it was public knowledge that that the DNC was actually fined also eventually for receiving the money and not reporting it. So that was just, So that's I did see those guys. I was there that day. I recorded it like I was supposed to. I passed it on to the technical services guys so they could do their work later on that night. So anyway.
Yeah, there's people that I tell them, Democrats, I come from a Democratic family, and they don't believe a single thing about the Chinese money. And you can give them Washington Post articles. It is public record. They did receive money from China. And for people to complain about, collusion now, I personally think is the collusion now is the biggest joke in the world, especially compared to this.
No, you're right, and it goes back to one of my biggest criticisms about politics, and of course, it's no secret I'm more conservative than anything else, and is that it's do as we say, not as we do. And listen, the only thing that Donald Trump did wrong, in my opinion, that I have proof is the guy got elected. You know what I mean? He whipped everybody, and they're just angry and they can't face it. So anyway.
So one more question on the list, and maybe we can wrap up. I know we've gone pretty long. What are your memories, if any? This is a hard one, of the interactions between Commerce Secretary Ron Brown and the Clintons, or any personal encounters with him and yourself? Did you observe any strain in interactions between them prior to his untimely death on April 3rd, 1996 in a plane crash?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. I knew him probably, I had as much interaction with him as I did any cabinet member. Yeah. First of all, let me tell you something about Ron Brown. Set aside politics. This is the guy, if you were broken down on the side of the road in the most dangerous area in where you live for blacks, this guy would stop and help you. This is the nicest guy I ever met. He was so congenial. He was so calm. He wore impeccable clothing. His manners, I really liked him. He actually kind of endeared himself to us in a positive way. We learned the officers and the agents' names. To the more important part of your question, I heard rumors through the law enforcement grapevine that the FBI was trying to put pressure on him to testify against the Clintons. I heard those rumors too. Do I know if they're true? I don't. Do I think that his plane crash was hokey? Yeah, planes crash. I'm a former Air Force guy. I'm a former Air Marshal. Stuff goes wrong, but it rarely goes wrong where you can't get access to it. And then there's so many things, like everything else with the Clinton. And I use Vince Foster as an example. Their poor friend who can't even commit suicide without it turning into a scandal. This guy can't even have a plane crash, and these other people died, and everything is a scandal. That's just a description of how slimy they are. Do I think it's true? I don't know. I will tell you. He was Secretary of Commerce.
Yes, sir.
So there was another cabinet member. She was a woman. She was a black woman. I can't think of her name right now. She was very.
Oh, we'll find her.
Yeah, she's about 50. At the time, she's probably late 40s, early 50s. Very wealthy, very attractive. Her whole personality changed when Ron Brown died. Now, I'm not suggesting they had any kind of a relationship. What I'm saying is, she liked this guy, and he was I do remember a time where like there was some meeting going on in the Roosevelt Room. The president was in there, and whatever it was a little. There was some back and forth. And when the door opened up and the meeting was over, Ron Brown was dressing down like Stephanopoulos and Emanuel and the chief of staff at the time, who was Mac McLarty. Like he was standing his ground.
This Hazel O'Leary by any chance?
Hazel O'Leary, that's right.
Okay.
Hazel, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So thank you. Very good. So so when he died, like her whole personality, I saw her, like she was heartbroken, and it wasn't just because he was her friend and he was a black guy. He was a strong guy, and he was a cabinet member that wouldn't be pushed around. So that's my take on it.
Right, and I think, if you read this book, Ron Brown's Body by Jack Cashel, it does paint a picture of a corrupt party official, but he was really, I would say, he reminds me kind of the Tony Soprano type of person in the book, because he gets along with his neighbors and friends and family, but he was definitely under pressure according to this book, and also he was having affairs according to the book.
I'm not insinuating that he was an angel. I'm just saying his relationship to us and to me was very nice and polite. Now that you're reminding me, I'm starting to refresh my memory. You're right. He was a tough party boss. He was. There was a lot of controversy around him. Whether it was true or not, I don't know, but it doesn't surprise me. But to compare him to Tony Soprano is funny and accurate, because you're right. He's kind, he's nice, he gets the job done, but behind closed doors, he may be the guy, making the sausage. So
right, and it's hard for me sometimes. I'm on YouTube, and we're dealing a lot with issues of, I criticize China not because I hate China, but because we have issues with China. Right. And I criticize issues of the Clinton administration because, the Clinton administration caused a lot of damage that we're still feeling to this day with this stuff with China that Ron Brown was involved in. Yes. And, you're sitting here, this is, maybe we can wrap up.
Sure.
But you see this FBI director Comey, and you see the, Susan Rice and other people, they're using this, the dignity of their offices and the law enforcement and the intelligence agencies to defend their record, as opposed to skeptics like myself or Alex Jones. How does it feel? You've been questioned as a law enforcement agent. They don't trust you at all. Larry Patterson, Arkansas state trooper, testifies several times against Bill Clinton. Gary Aldrich. You have people of all levels of law enforcement. In fact, Eric Holder himself, back during the Clinton administration, once he got out of office, he was like, how did these pardons get by me? So how does it feel personally to observe this current climate of the FBI, the CIA, and these intelligence agencies that seem to have been tainted? I mean, even today, there's this news of an FBI mole in the Trump campaign.
Right. So here's my take on the whole thing. The Clintons corrupted these people 25 years ago. They corrupted the Secret Service. And when I say that, and I don't know what the Secret Service's involvement in this, it's probably not much, but here's why I say that. Up until 5 years ago, there was a Secret Service, maybe less than 5 years ago, 4 years ago, there was a Secret Service deputy director named Sullivan. No, that's not right. His name will come to me. Anyway, everybody knew this guy was going to be the next director of the Secret Service because he married one of Hillary Clinton's right-hand women, one of her staff members, and he married her, and to get complete control of the Secret Service, when she became president, she was going to make him director. Everybody knew it. He knew it. He told everybody. So anyway, but they got derailed, not because of Clinton so much as about 2 years before, with all those scandals happening during the Obama administration. He ends up getting the short end of the stick, and they fire him. They're supposed to fire him immediately, but they hold on to him for like 6 months, and they hide him in Homeland Security until he reaches his 30-year retirement. But setting that aside, They corrupted the FBI, and I can prove it to you, during their time. Filegate, 900 files end up at the White House complex. FBI raw data files on American citizens. 900 of them end up, some in Craig Livingstone's safe, some in different places. Nobody was ever prosecuted. How did they get there? You know, the good fairy didn't go and get them from the FBI. Here's what happened. And you know part of this because you read Aldridge's book. He asked Aldridge to do this, and he told him no. So then, and I say he, I mean Livingstone. Craig Livingstone picks up the phone. He gets somebody else in the FBI that will do it for him, and the files come down and they get what they want. That's where the corruption begins, because now they've done something. They've gotten the FBI to do something that's dirty. They have control over them, and then they probably funnel money to them too. I don't know this to be sure, but this is how my experience, what I've seen, what I've read, what I've seen firsthand. This is the way they function. They corrupted the FBI back then. They partially corrupted the CIA. Certainly, she could have helped corrupt the CIA to a certain extent, not the entire agency, but to a certain extent. And when I say corrupt these agencies, I'm not talking about the rank and file. I'm talking about the executive level. And they corrupt these agencies to a certain point with a little bit of bribery, with a little bit of favors, a little bit of promises. Like I said, this one agent, and his name has slipped my mind, I'm telling you, everybody knew he was going to be the director of the Secret Service until whatever the last thing was with President Obama. It wasn't the hooker scandal. It was the
elevator.
The elevator thing. I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And somebody had to go down for it. And this guy had been there the longest. And so they made him the whipping boy. So anyway, I'm sorry I can't think of his name. If you said it, I could identify it. Was it Tom's? No. Anyway, so that's my take on it. I think they started this corruption. They're like one of those crazy aliens in a science fiction movie. They get their tentacles in somebody, and they corrupt them. They seem to corrupt everybody they come in contact with, and to a certain extent. So that's my take.
Right, and the reason I'm asking it is because we're told implicitly now. Back 14 years ago, I was never really. I mean, after Al Gore kind of became the whiner in chief in 2000, I never. It took me a long time until Ron Paul got me back into being interested in politics, but I probably would have voted for Ralph Nader. And the issue I'm seeing is like I said earlier, one of the first questions, we have this massive federal law enforcement and intelligence infrastructure. And, Julian Assange, you could agree with some of the things he does or hate him or whatever, but he's shown a light on the fact that, that these guys are actually committing crimes in the execution of their occupation. And I'm wondering, really, back in your day, they were smearing agents like yourself. They were smearing Arkansas state troopers for whatever reason. I mean, how are they not more believable than Bill Clinton? He was the governor of their state. Right. And it's ironic that now they're saying, well, believe law enforcement, believe Andrew McCabe, believe right. James Comey, even though they both contradict each other, but believe Susan Rice, who has factually lied on national TV. Believe James Clapper, who has spent since the 1960s in Vietnam. He spent his entire life surveilling civilians and military as well. Believe John Brennan, who is a serial liar as well. And the reason that Gary Byrne, very generous with his time again, and I hope you keep writing and keep finding other projects for us to cover, and you're always welcome back. But before I give you it's the last word, I promise.
Sure.
I just want to say, I think there can be law enforcement that is to the proper degree transparent and serves the public. I don't see it happening until there's a major overhaul and possibly the elimination of some of these agencies.
Sure, I agree with you. There's too much. There is a lot of redundancy. There's that's one of the things I talk about in Secrets of the Secret Service. Is one of the Secret Service's problems is that they have too many jobs. They have protection. They have counterfeit. They do credit card. They protect all these old retired presidents. And one of the suggestions I make is they throw that over the side. They should protect these people when they leave office for a year, and then let them hire their own security. If these people are so damn smart and can run the country, they can certainly hire a retired Secret Service agent to run their own security, and then let the government pay them a stipend. And that would reduce the size of the workload of the Secret Service, and you can take those agents and use them to fight counterfeit and to protect the current president, which we're short, the Secret Service, I shouldn't say we, but they, of not just uniform division officers, but agents. And as far as the time services, everybody needs, and I hate to use this, it's a kind of a crude terminology, but every agency, every 10 years needs an enema. They do. They need to be not the working grade, but the management level. And the CIA is no different than the FBI and the Secret Service. They've got so many levels of management. Oh my God, it's just incredible. So it does need to be shrunk down. Keep the workforce as big as it is, or bigger, the worker bees, but you don't need, you need to cut in half your management at least. And in some cases, you can probably cut it in more than in half.
All right. Well, Gary Byrne, where can we find you on? Where's the best place to find you?
Sure, at a diner. No. At my favorite diner. Okay. So you can find me at Gary Byrne Author on Twitter, on YouTube. If you just put in Gary Byrne and the word YouTube channel, it pulls up my channel. But if you just put my name in, it pulls up everything I've done. You can also on Instagram, I'm Gary James Byrne. And as you know, people can reach out to me on my Facebook page for the books, and we get back to you pretty quick. Of course, we've got we get back to you really quick because we've got a pretty good rapport with you. And again, thank you again for having me on. I appreciate it. And I will continue to make myself available to you when you feel like you can stand listening to me.
No, it's an honor. I love reading. Even regardless of military, or whatever. And when I can I wish I could get some of these other authors. I don't know. This guy with the China book, that would be the dream of my life now. But
right.
Again, so his first book from 2015 was Crisis of Character. And also Secrets of the Secret Service. And please, everybody, a hand for Gary Byrne. Have a good night. I know we kept you up.
Good. Thank you so much.
All right.
We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.